Hello, everyone. Welcome to Zen and Fanfics. Today we are featuring What If Elf Deku Posses Healing Force Magic. The story is written by Kateri0718 on Archive of Our Own. Org. Before we start, please like and subscribe for more content. Now let's dive into the story. Izuku Midoriya lived a lonely life. His mother raised him alone in the woods and died years ago, leaving Izuku by himself to figure out how to survive at an early age of 12. It had been a tough 5 years by himself. He suffered through harsh, hungry winters, hot and dry summers, and long, lonely nights. But he survived and honestly didn't mind being so alone most of the time. When he was young, he didn't understand why he was hated so much. Though as he grew older, he learned why the people would sneer and throw stones at him. You see, though Izuku's mother was Fae, his father was not. Izuku was born of 2 different races, human and elf. He was part elemental elf, earth to be exact. He had some minor healing abilities, could easily name plants and their properties, felt more at home in the woods than his own hut, and he never had to worry about going hungry due to being able to grow plant life at will. He would find himself reclining in tall trees, relaxing into the rough bark, inhaling the fresh scents of flowers and dirt. It was relaxing. He might be of both the human and mythical worlds, but he felt closer to his elf heritage, though he knew nothing of the culture than what was self-taught. But he didn't mind much. He still felt a disconnect to the world around him. He would find himself drowning in his thoughts and fading from reality into a world full of nothing. His mind would just fade, and he would wake up to the setting sun. Those days he was extra exhausted when he would return home. Those nights meals would be skipped, and he would just fall onto his straw bed and sleep. He would wake at dawn to scratchy eyes and a dry mouth, crawl from his bed and start his long day over again. This wasn't one of those days. This day, Izuku woke cheerfully. He swung his legs from his bed and ran his hands through his curly green hair. Perks of his elf heritage. As if the pointed ears and tan skin didn't make him stand out enough. Other elves could easily hide their ears and other distinguishing features, but he couldn't. He lacked that type of magic, which meant he could never hide among the humans. So, he was forced to live alone. Shaking his head from his quickly souring thoughts, Izuku strolled to his front door and flung it open to the bright sun and sharp whistling air. Taking in a deep breath of plant life, he jogged from his hut to the edge of the wood. The perks of living alone so far from the village was he could comfortably bask in the nature around him when he felt the need. He could eat when he wanted. The earth provided all he needed. He didn't have to worry about meat. He didn't eat it. Stretching his arms up above his head and bending his back to crack it, he smiled to himself and walked barefoot into the woods. Izuku held his hands together behind his head and smiled to himself. The dirt squished up between his toes, causing footsteps to linger behind him. The wind teased his hair, and birds sang their morning songs to him. It was a good morning, quiet and peaceful. He didn't know where he was going this morning. He normally didn't. He would just walk, letting the woods guide him. Today he was led to an open field full of yellow poppies. He had never been to this field before, which he found hard to believe since he wandered in the woods almost every day. Stopping in the middle of the field, he let out a breath of relief. It was peaceful here. He couldn't hear the village, couldn't hear birds or other animals, which was odd. Blinking, he looked around himself in concern. It was too peaceful. He should see birds singing and fluttering around, but they were absent. The wind had died down to an almost uncomfortable level. His hands came down from behind his head to grasp at the edges of his dark green tunic. Anxiety creeped into his bones. Something was wrong. He had never felt this discomfort in his own element. It almost felt like the field was warning him to turn back and run home. His eyes roamed around him looking for something. Anything to tell him what was going on. But he couldn't see anything. So, he decided if his eyes couldn't find the problem, then maybe his connection to the earth could. Kneeling, he dug both his hands into the dirt and closed his eyes. Concentrating, he focused on the poppy field he strolled into. He could feel the dirt, the bugs crawling around. He could feel the plants growing and drinking from the earth. Nothing that was unnatural. Squeezing his eyes closed tighter, he focused harder. When he felt the dirt become wet, he scrunched his eyes in confusion. It wasn't raining. And even if it was, this liquid was warm, not cold. It was warm, and thick. It wasn't near him, but farther into the poppy field. Opening his eyes, he stood and walked deeper into the field. This feeling was wrong, almost frightening. Every nerve in his body was screaming at him to turn around and run. But he didn't want to listen. Something was very wrong, and he wanted to know what it was. Izuku paused in his walking when he smelt iron and ash on the air. That wasn't a normal smell for nature. Tensing, he scanned the field around him. He knew that iron smell was BLD, and a lot of it. Closing his eyes, he concentrated on the dirt once again and felt around himself. In front of him, over a hill, he could feel the warm, wet earth. And it wasn't just a little warmth like you would feel from a dead deer or small animal. No, this was huge. This warmth made him itch. Someone or something was losing BLD, and a lot of it. Opening his eyes, he stared at the hill in front of him. Whatever had lost so much BLD needed help. And Izuku, being Izuku, wouldn't turn anyone or anything away, even if it meant putting himself in danger. Swallowing a lump in his throat, Izuku slowly moved through the poppies to the crest of the hill. Once he stood atop the hill, his face paled at the sight before him. There, lying in the field of bright yellow poppies, lay a gold dragon. The ground surrounding the dragon was stained red, its BLD seeping from wounds he could not see. Its wings lay stretched out across his body, almost like they were broken. He could see where its wings were torn, the thin membranes in ribbons. Its head lay straight out in front of it, pillowed against red flowers. Izuku didn't know what to do. He was unsure if the unfortunate thing was still alive. He was too far to tell if it had breath in its lungs. What could do such damage to a dragon? One of the fiercest beasts of the mythical world. He almost didn't want to know. Taking in a deep breath, he decided to slowly approach the wounded dragon. Maybe if it were still alive, he could possibly help it, assuming it didn't eat him first. Once he was close enough, he could see the labored breathing of the dragon. He watched as the dragon tensed as he grew. Okay, so the dragon was aware of its surroundings. How aware, he couldn't be sure. He knew he didn't want to just reach out and touch it. That would probably startle the poor beast and cause it more pain. Taking in a deep breath, Izuku sunk down to sit a ways away. He was out of reach of the dragon, but still close enough to watch the dragon's movements. Letting out his breath, Izuku spoke calmly and softly. "Hello, dragon. My name is Izuku. I am part elf. Can I help you?" He knew dragons were noble creatures and didn't like to beat around the bush. They were smart and far from being animalistic. Hell, he was sure they had more humanity in them than most humans he came across. Dragons were also more likely to trust a fey folk than a human. The dragon tensed and flinched away from his voice, causing Izuku to flinch as well. "Oh, I'm sorry, dragon. I didn't mean to startle you, but I'm afraid your wounds are severe, and I might be able to help heal you with my earth magic if you would allow it." Izuku clenched his tunic in his fist, hoping the dragon would allow him to help. Izuku watched as two ruby-red eyes slowly opened to stare at him. He could see the distrust and hate in those orbs. He had those looks directed at him many times, but it was what was hidden underneath the hate that made his breath catch fear. The dragon was afraid of him. Izuku wasn't surprised. It could probably smell the human in him. And every fey creature knew humans were distrustful. He wouldn't lie and say that didn't hurt. He didn't like being half-human. They were cruel and selfish. Opening his mouth, Izuku spoke. "I understand your hesitance, dragon, but I only mean to help. I know no humans and do not want to. I simply wish to help you." Ruby eyes squinted at him as if the dragon was sizing him up. When the dragon closed his eyes and released a long, deep breath, Izuku relaxed. He knew he wasn't trusted yet, but the dragon had relaxed, if only slightly. "I am part elemental elf, earth to be exact. I have some healing abilities. I won't be able to heal you completely, but I can at least stop your bleeding, if you would allow it." He kept his eyes trained on the wounded dragon's face. He knew dragons couldn't speak, but if you paid close enough attention to their body language and their facial reactions, you could understand them, just like every other living creature. The dragon opened his eyes once again, but kept his gaze rigidly fixed on Izuku. He watched as the dragon glanced at his hands and raised a brow slowly. Immediately understanding what the dragon wanted, he complied. "You want me to prove it to you." Izuku loved his magic, but being part human caused his power to come at cost. And he hated the cost. It pained him in many ways. Sighing, Izuku continued, "I understand your hesitance. Give me a moment and I can show you." Reaching behind himself to the back of his belt, he slowly withdrew a small dagger, bringing it to rest on the ground in front of himself. He froze when a growl erupted from the dragon in warning. Izuku raised his hands in surrender. "I simply wish to show you I can heal. I will not use the dagger on you." Izuku watched as the dragon relaxed and slowly nodded at him to continue. He brought the dagger to his palm and sliced a small cut, large enough to cause blood to well and drip to the ground, but not deep enough to cause lasting damage. Setting his dagger down in the poppies at his side, and set his newly acquired wound flat against the earth and concentrated. A slight green glow seeped from the ground and wrapped itself around Izuku's hand. When the glow dissipated, he raised his hand up to where the dragon could see the now wound-free palm. He watched the dragon study his palm and then glanced down at the earth his hand had been pressed on. He knew the second the dragon saw his shame for the creature tensed and let out a small growl in distrust. Tensing, he swallowed a lump in his throat and looked down at the now dead earth and wilted flowers where his palm had rested. He knew the dragon wouldn't allow him to help without an explanation. An explanation he desperately didn't want to give. Another growl came from the dragon, causing him to snap his attention at the wary beast. Closing his eyes, he took a breath. "Because of my human BLD, using my magic comes at a cost. Yes, I can use the earth to heal, but the punishment for it is the earth I use dies. It's painful, for the earth and for me. I don't enjoy this, so I only use my power when it's needed." He opened his eyes and looked back at the dragon. He could see the indecisiveness in the dragon's ruby eyes. He was hesitant to allow a power like that to touch him. Izuku couldn't blame him. Fae were deeply attached to the earth and elements. It gave them life and power. So, the thought of killing it for one's own gain was deeply disturbing. "I can help you without using my power if you would prefer. It would take longer, but I can help the old-fashioned way with herbs and tending to your wounds with medicine." He hoped the dragon would take him up on the offer. He was losing BLD, and Izuku was afraid he would die without intervention. The dragon squinted his eyes at him in consideration. Izuku could still see the distrust in them. Thinking through his option, Izuku could only think of one he didn't really want to do, but he had a feeling this dragon would never accept his help with his human BLD running through his veins. Taking in a deep breath, Izuku spoke. "Look, your wounds are deep, and you're losing BLD far too quickly for your healing to take hold. I understand why you do not trust me. I can only assume humans did this to you." When the dragon tensed and released an angry growl, he had his answer. "Yo, I thought so. My human BLD makes you distrust me, not to mention the cost of my magic. So, instead of you trusting me, maybe I can make a vow to you instead. I would be forced to follow through on the vow. Just because I'm part human doesn't mean elf vows won't hold true." He didn't want to make a vow. Just because he was a half-elf didn't mean he didn't know the cost of vows. If he broke his vow, his magic would leave him. But because of his half-human heritage, his vows came at a steeper price. A price he wouldn't be able to take back. He would be stuck with it the rest of his life. His mother had warned him many times to never make a vow. He hadn't listened to her and learned his lesson. A lesson he still wore to this day. A chain he could never be rid of. He could only hope his vow holder would never find him. That vow had been small, but had a high price. And this vow he would have to make would be a large one due to the condition the dragon was in. He would have to word his vow carefully. The dragon's eyes widened at the idea of receiving an elf's vow. Izuku saw the reaction and spoke. "Yes, I will give you my vow. But because of what I am, my vows come at a price to me. I won't know the price till the vow is in place. So, you must be aware I do not know the cost. I only offer you this vow because you are not far from death. The earth can feel it, as I'm sure you can as well. And I do not want to see this earth lose any more of its eldest children. Dragons, Dragons were one of the Earth's first children. Ancient, powerful, and appealing. Dragons were rarely seen anymore due to how the humans had hunted them for their steel-like scales and sword-like claws, for their body parts that the human used for their tonics and remedies. It was blasphemy to harm a dragon, and Fae everywhere knew if one were wounded, you were due all you could to help the creature. And this is the only thing Izuku could do. I'm the only Fae, even half available around here for many miles. We are too close to the human villages for other Fae to live. I can't find you anyone else. So, I am sorry, it's either accept my vow or return back to the earth. Izuku bowed his head in apology. A deep, angry growl was Izuku's answer. He knew his words would anger the dragon, but what he wasn't expecting was to be knocked to his back when a clawed paw smacked into his chest, pinning him down to the yellow poppies, causing a puff of yellow petals to flow up and around him. Opening his eyes, he connected to fierce ruby ones. Anger, frustration, and pain laced through them. Another growl erupted from the dragon as his body collapsed back to the ground, exhausted from his abrupt actions. Izuku crawled out from under the giant paw and quickly began to speak. Please let me help you. You don't have much time. I can't heal you, but my vow can help. Please. Izuku hoped his begging would get to the dragon, and it had. He sighed in relief when the dragon opened his eyes and nodded his head in confirmation. Oh, thank the goddess. Okay, just don't move, and he'll get started. Standing to his feet, Izuku let out a shaky breath and began. Izuku brought his hands out in front of him and held them inches from the dragon's body. He let his power rush to his hands and glow an unearthly green. He snapped his eyes open to reveal the same glowing green and began his vow. I, Izuku Midoriya, son of Inko Midoriya, make a vow. A vow to heal and care for this dragon, so that he may fly with Brother Wind and bask in Father Sun. Yellow poppies flew around him and the dragon as the wind picked up. I vow to never harm this dragon nor the earth he was born from in order to care for him. I will not betray nor forsake this dragon. Allow this vow to heal and revitalize this dragon to where I can care for him as I have vowed. Mother Earth, please take your price for this vow. What price is cast upon this underserving halfling is accepted and welcome. This I, Izuku Midoriya, do vow. With his final words, Izuku felt the wind die and his price snap into effect against his wrists, neck, and ankles. At once Izuku felt pure horror race through his entire being. Tears came to his eyes at the price he just paid. A price no Fae would ever want. The dragon must have been closer to death than Izuku had realized. He looked at his outstretched hands and watched the glow disappear and reveal a deep black cuff the consistency of steel wrapped tightly around each wrist. He brought his hand up to his throat and felt the same steel-like band there. He didn't need to look at his ankles. He could feel them against his skin. He was chained once again, but this time was deeper. It was suffocating. The dragon now owned him. The earth had made her decision and had decided he would be owned by this dragon for the audacity of asking for such power by a halfling. He was an owned Fae. ASLV. He was owned. The freedom he had with the forest was gone. He was bound to this dragon. He swallowed down his tears and looked up at the dragon that hadn't moved. The dragon was staring at the cuffs on his wrists. His eyes were wide. His pupils narrowed into slits showing his shock. The dragon seemed to be just as horrified as he was. What was he supposed to do? Fae aren't supposed to be owned. They were meant to be free. They lived in nature and thrived from it. Without it, it was like having the air ripped from their lungs. Fear swallowed Izuku's horror, and the air in his lungs seemed to stop. Katsuki watched as the half-Fae next to him suddenly fell back onto his butt and began crying. His breath stuttered and seemed to cease function. His face paled and his eyes widened in what he immediately recognized as fear. He could understand the fear the Fae was feeling. Katsuki wasn't stupid. He knew what those bands on the Fae's wrists and neck meant. He now owned the Fae, a thought that absolutely repulsed him. He knew the Fae was panicking. If it didn't try to help the BSDRD, he'd pass out here soon. Sighing in irritation, he stood up. His eyes widened when he noticed the pain was gone. Deciding to think on that later, he turned towards the Fae and brought his head down to his level. He placed his nose against the Fae's chest and huffed out a breath. He ignored the flinch the Fae made when his warm scales made contact. This would be much easier if he had a human form, but his clan lost that ability centuries ago. So, he continued to breathe against the Fae's chest, hoping he would start matching his breathing. He gently pushed against the Fae and released a slow breath. When the Fae's breathing slowed and regulated, he slowly backed away and sat back on his haunches to study the man on the ground. His green eyes were still wide, but his panic seemed to have left him. Well, that was a good thing. But now he had to figure out how to communicate with the BSDRD. The Fae brought his hands up to his face and rubbed his eyes. He didn't say anything, just continued to watch him. He let out an exasperated huff of smoke and brought his tail around towards the Fae. He flinched back, and Katsuki withdrew his tail momentarily, but continued forward and gently tapped the end of his tail against the Fae's new cuffs. He let his tail fall and waited for the Fae to speak. Izuku tensed when the dragon tapped his new bonds. So that confirmed that dragons were intelligent like his mother had told him. He wasn't stupid. He knew the dragon had pulled him out of a panic attack, something his mother used to do for him daily. Blinking at the dragon, Izuku cleared his throat and spoke. Yes. I'm now bound to you. He looked down at his wrists and clenched his fists. Raising his head to meet the dragon's gaze, he spoke with a quiver to his voice. According to elf law, I must do what you want me to do. Go where you want me to. But, you can't speak, can you? Izuku asked. The dragon merely huffed at him, releasing a puff of smoke into his face. Izuku waved away the smoke with a cough. I'll take that as a no. Do you want me bound to you? Izuku figured yes or no questions would be best since the dragon couldn't speak to him. The dragon growled lowly and shook its head no with a curl of his lip. Swallowing back his spike of fear, Izuku asked another question. There's a chance I know a witch who could help us out. The dragon merely huffed and shook his head yes and gently nudged him away as if telling him, well, let's go. Izuku caught his balance and wrung his hands together. Well, okay then. But you can't fly there. Your wings aren't healed enough for flight. We're gonna have to walk. He watched the dragon roll his eyes, expressing his obvious irritation. Okay, it's this way. Turning away from the dragon, Izuku headed back towards his home. He wasn't looking forward to asking for help from this witch. She was a horrible person and demanded payments that he didn't like one bit. But he didn't have much of a choice. The dragon wanted to communicate, and Izuku had to do what he wanted. Perks are the type of bond he had. Swallowing his discomfort, Izuku held his head high and continued their walk through the forest. Katsuki followed behind the green-eyed Fae in front of him, irritation and anger making his scales quiver and flash between their gold and red, the red indicating his anger. The blasted Fae didn't say anything more to him after asking about the witch. He watched as the Fae walked resolutely through the woods. He held his head high, but his fists were clenched tight. The aura the Fae was giving off made Katsuki feel hesitant about going to this witch. Something was wrong, and Katsuki was unsure how to approach the Fae about it. They couldn't speak to each other, which made asking what the Fae's problem impossible. Flicking his tail in agitation, Katsuki concluded he would have to ask the Fae after the witch helped them. He would get answers then. The Fae in front of him jumped over a fallen log feet, touching back down so gently the grass below his feet barely bent. Katsuki tilted his head, curiosity taking over his recent agitation. This Fae was very peculiar for being a half-breed. The other half-breeds he had come across over the years had been crasser and harsher, their human build dominating over their Fae. But his one was odd. He walked silently. The trees seemed to almost bend their branches to brush against him. Vines reached for him. The birds and bees seemed to want to whisper to him, fluttering around him and some occasionally landing on his shoulders of curly mop of hair. He watched as a spunky squirrel scramble up the Fae's leg to crawl onto his head and dig around in the green mess, causing the Fae to flinch and promptly yank the squirrel from his hair. The action startled Katsuki. It was the first time the Fae had made a harsh move and became angry at the rodent. The words the Fae barked out just made him even more confused. You know you can't do that. You will disrupt it. And you know I can't have that. So please do not mess with my head again. Tilting his head, he watched as the Fae gently dropped the squirrel onto the ground and turned away from the nuisance to stomp away. That was odd. They walked a little more into the woods before coming to a clearing. Katsuki didn't like this clearing. There were no living plants in the area, just dried grass and withered trees. It was a very unsettling place, and Katsuki immediately knew they had no business being here. Making a quick decision, he extended a wing, blocking the Fae from going any further. The Fae turned towards him with a knowing look. Yeah, I understand. It's a very unsettling place. But I promise you will not come harm here. I have an understanding with the witch who lives here. He watched as the Fae rubbed his arms, discomfort creeping into his scent. Shaking his head, no, he attempted to turn the Fae away from the disturbing place, only for the Fae to shake his head no and speak again. Look, I get it. Trust me. But this is the only place I know where we can get a little bit of help. If we want to deal with this bond, then we need to be able to communicate. We have no option. The Fae had made eye contact with him and held his gaze resolutely. He didn't like this one bit, but the Fae was right. They had no choice. Narrowing his eyes, he tucked his wing away and allowed the green-haired man to continue. He followed behind him, hackles raised and eyes shifting here and there looking for any threats. His attention was drawn back to the Fae when he spoke when an old cottage came into view. The Fae stopped at a point where the green grass stopped and the dead began. He didn't turn towards him. Okay, I need you to stay here and not come any closer to the cottage. Do not attempt to approach it. Do not cross over the line of living grass. She cannot sense you here. Toga and I have an understanding for when I need her assistance. No matter what you hear, do not try to help. She isn't a witch to mess with, and her payments are, well, I won't say. But do not attempt to help in any way. I will try to make it quick, but she can be rather demanding. Can you keep to this? The way the Fae was speaking made Katsuki uncomfortable. It made him want to intervene. Deciding to trust the Fae, Katsuki nodded his head in a hesitant manner. Izuku nodded his head. She will be unable to see you here, but if you make noise, she will know you are here. And we do not need her to get her claws into you as well. Katsuki didn't like the choice of words, but held his growl of discontent as he watched the Fae walk away to the hut and knock. Katsuki was a good distance from the cottage, but his hearing and eyesight was good enough he could hear and see when the door opened and a woman spoke. Her voice made his scales quiver. Oh, it's my Izuku. My, I was just thinking of you. He watched as she launched herself onto him and buried her face into the crook of his neck. He watched the elf tense, and a hiss of pain escape from him. The copper smell of BLD reached his nose, causing Katsuki to tense and narrow his eyes. Toga, I've told you not to feed on me as soon as you see me. I haven't even told you what I need yet. Katsuki watched as the girl pulled away from his neck, a line of BLD seeping from the corner of her mouth. She was feeding from him. Drinking the BLD of an elf was not something to be done. Even as a half-breed, the elf's BLD was rich in magic and sacred to the Earth Mother. He had to swallow back a growl as the girl spoke, her voice sickly sweet. Oh, Izu, you know you don't have a choice when you come here. It's our deal, remember. She brought her finger to his face and traced his jaw in what should have been an affectionate gesture, but instead came off as creepy. Grabbing her wrist, he pulled it from his face and spoke. Yes, you are right, but I need a favor. Katsuki watched as the witch's face brightened and a sick smile came to her face. She gasped and jumped up and down. Yes. It's been so long, my Izu. I'm so happy you need a favor. Same payment as always. Yes. She asked, bringing her hand to the front of his tunic, clenching it. He watched the man close his eyes and nod his head. Yes, Toga, the same payment applies. I will keep the living plants and animals away from your cottage, and I will care for you. Wait, what? Katsuki looked around him at the dead land in front of him. Izuku had done this. Horror washed over him. If he remembered correctly, when he used his power and killed the land, it caused him pain. To keep the land dead and the animals away at all times must be beyond painful for the man. His eyes were wide in disbelief. What was this elf wrapped up in? Even more horror washed over him when a grunt of pain brought his attention back to the cottage. The girl had moved her hands from the front of his shirt to grab at the front of the man's pants and began stroking him harshly. "Isa, my sweet, sweet mutt, you always take such good care of me." She yanked her hand away from him and clapped her hands together. "Now what do you need of me this time?" He watched as the Fae brought his hands behind his back and waved towards Katsuki. Katsuki flinched away from the line of living grass when a tall hedge of greenery bolted from the ground, blocking his view of the cottage. Though he could still hear the words being exchanged, panic seeped into his bones. The half-breed was doing something he didn't want Katsuki to see, and it unnerved him. "I need a charm I can control. A charm I can decide what it can do. You don't need to know what I need it for, but it needs to be strong and last indefinitely." He heard the girl giggle. "Oh yes, that'll cost you greatly, and I will enjoy it. Okay, I'll do it. Now give me your hand." The girl's excited voice faded only to be replaced with anger. "Izuku, what is this? Oh, my, you bound yourself. Why, you naughty, naughty puppy. I do not like this one bit. Your payment just went up." A sound of flesh meeting flesh met Katsuki's ears, causing a growl to slip past his muzzle. She hit him. What the dash? His growl was cut short when the man spoke. "Yes, it was not by choice. I apologize, Toga, but I can still provide payment. I have not been commanded to not do so." A small hum of pleasure came from the girl. "Okay, then. You will pay me now, before I make this charm. Now, you know you're not welcome into my home. So, you will make payment here outside like the dog you are." Katsuki growled at the words, this which made his stomach roll in disgust. What was this DMN payment he had to pay? He almost wanted to fly over the hedge, blocking his view, and yank the man into the air away from the woman. If Katsuki could vomit, he would have at the new noise making its way through the hedge. This was not a sound an elf should be making. It was a pain-filled not MMM that came from bodily harm, but a MMM that came from two people breeding violently. Was Izuku breeding with her? Why did it sound so painful? Katsuki hated the amount of worry that he was feeling, but he couldn't help it. The fact the elf was in pain was horrid. The fact that he, a dragon, was just standing here doing nothing tore at Katsuki's pride. Dragons were prideful, protective, and vengeful creatures, made by the Earth Mother to protect all her other children. Him standing here doing nothing was an insult to his bloodline and the Earth Mother. He paced in front of the giant hedge for what felt like hours. He could do nothing. The hedge the elf had created kept him from intervening. Not only did it keep him from seeing anything, but it seemed a barrier of some sort had been erected around the dead clearing. That in itself confused him. Elves couldn't create barriers like the one connected to the hedge. His confusion just pissed him off more. The noises of pain and pleasure had died down, the clearing now silent, but he could still scent and taste a crisp copper on the air. His instincts were roaring in his head. He needed to know the elf was safe. Though he had only met the irritating elf hours ago, he felt a pull to protect the man. Katsuki was pulled from his frantic thoughts when the hedge in front of him shuddered. His attention snapped to the hedge as it lowered so he could see the cottage once again. Eyes wide, he watched as the halfling walked towards him, shoulders drawn, eyes downcast. Without looking at him, Izuku spoke. "I will activate the charm once we are on my property. Let's get away from here, dragon. I don't live too terribly far." Izuku walked past him into the woods. Katsuki watched wide-eyed as the Fae walked past him. The man was tense and had a slight limp to his gait, which only slightly concerned him. Deciding he could not address the issue, yet he followed behind the Fae, watching as the forest around them reacted to the man's mood. The trees seemed to fold in on themselves. The grass wilted under the man's feet. Katsuki noticed the green-haired man's feet were finally leaving imprints where he walked, and for some reason that bothered him. He watched the flowers close as he walked past. The animals quieted and the bees silenced themselves. It was as if the very earth itself was denying the half-elf its light and life. Katsuki could still feel the life and joy flowing through the earth as he walked on it. So why did it seem the elf couldn't? He wasn't stupid. He knew what the elf had traded for the charm needed to be able to speak to him. The elf gave himself to the witch. At least his body anyways. Was this charm really worth the price? He was pulled from his musings when he saw the elf stumble, his hand flashing up to land on a tree. Katsuki pulled up short at the reaction the tree had at the touch. It shook like a dog trying to rid itself of a flea. Then his eyes widened as the elf withdrew his hand, leaving a black hand print behind. His touch had killed part of the tree. What the hell was going on? He bounded forward to catch the elf with his neck as his knees buckled. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to." The elf cried into his scales. Katsuki huffed and poked the elf with the tip of his tail. If the elf was going to stumble and kill his forest with his touch, then Katsuki would remove his touch from it. Puffing out a breath of smoke, Katsuki lowered himself to the ground, allowing the elf to sag even deeper onto his scales. He could feel how weak the man was, and it disturbed him. This Fae was surrounded by what was supposed to give him life and vitality, yet the earth seemed to have abandoned him. Izuku sniffed and looked up, connecting his eyes with the dragon's red ones. "Do you want me to get on?" He blinked stupidly at the dragon. Katsuki merely blinked, huffed, and nodded his head yes towards the man. He waited patiently to see if he was going to put up a fight, and was surprised when he sighed and slowly climbed upon his back and settled himself. He allowed the man to position himself comfortably before rising to his feet. He turned his head to look at the weak Fae and waited for directions. Izuku pointed in front of himself and spoke. "Just keep traveling straight and you'll come to my home." He let his voice trail off as sleep claimed him. Katsuki watched the elf sag into sleep and then began his walk to the halfling's home. He had so many questions and concerns, but for now, he would have to wait to have those answered. Once he had the elf home and rested, he would get his answers one way or another. Katsuki let out a breath of relief as he entered a small clearing with a tiny hand-built hut in the center. The hut had a straw roof and seemed to be made from old timber. There was a neatly gardened patch of vegetables to the right of the hut, along with a hand-dug well. Little baskets of flowers hung from the windows. It was a remarkably simple abode. Something you could easily tell was built for no more than 2 individuals. As he drew closer to the home, he started to notice little things that were out of place. Like the writing upon the door, that of which he couldn't read. It didn't seem like it was placed there by the small Fae. It almost looked like it was written in an act of hate. It was odd. Squinting, he lowered his head to look closer at the ground the hut sat upon. The grass was dead. Why was the grass dead? But the surrounding forest and grass were healthy. This whole thing with this Fae thoroughly confused Katsuki. He knew half Fae were looked down upon, but the way this green-haired idiot lived seemed sad, like he was just wasting away. His house was falling into disrepair. He could see the patches on the roof now that he was closer, the broken windows, the rotted walls. He needed answers, especially now that he was bound to this Fae. He let his gaze leave the hut and focused on the irritating boy on his back. Growling loud enough to wake the sleeping figure, he lowered himself to the ground and settled himself comfortably. He crossed his legs in front of him and let his wings unfold and drape across the ground, allowing the sun to warm their newly healed scars. When the green-haired menace didn't wake, he growled even louder. He chuffed when the body jolted up and proceeded to flounder and tumble off his back in an undignified heap. Oh, that was funny to watch. Izuku pulled himself up from the ground at the chuffing of his new dragon, MSTR. Of course, he found that funny. He groaned when his body reminded him of the trauma it had just recently been through with Toga. Sighing, he rubbed his hands on his face and spoke. "Well, you got me home. Thank you for that. I know having a rider is insulting. So, I apologize for the inconvenience." Katsuki let out a satisfied snort. At least he knew how insulting it was to put someone on his back like that, and had the decency to apologize. Taking a deep breath, Izuku reached into his pocket and pulled out a beaded necklace. It had bright red beads along with a brown tree-like material, like branches, spaced out neatly in between. He placed the charm over his head and allowed it to drape across his chest. The thing felt horrible. It felt like another chain around his neck. "The charm has been spelled so only I can understand you. Merely speak with your mind and it should work." Izuku glanced at the dragon and waited. Katsuki narrowed his eyes. There's no way it was that easy. What the hell was that with that witch back there? Katsuki knew he would be yelling, but he didn't care. He was pissed way too much to censor his tone. Izuku flinched at the way the dragon's voice came to him. No need to yell. He was interrupted by a growl of annoyance. Toga is a BLD witch. She's the only witch who will even speak with me anywhere within a 500-mile radius. So, her methods in which she takes her payments are painful. Izuku rubbed his arm, as if he were trying to comfort himself. Katsuki growled low. That isn't a good enough answer. What did she do to you? Whatever she did you up. You will tell me. He knew he was pushing, but he didn't care. Never did. Izuku closed his eyes. Did the dragon even understand that he physically couldn't say no to anything he was commanded to? Izuku grew angry, followed by shame for what he was about to confess to. He'd love to censor his words, but the command left no room for interpretation. Closing his eyes, he balled his hands in fists and spoke through clenched teeth. She had me, her while she fed from me, then proceeded to carve her PND of flesh from my back for seeking her help. Had me fall to my knees and beg for this dim-in charm, while she... Izuku clenched his mouth together, fighting the compulsion to answer. Katsuki blinked at the phase-course words. This man was normally soft-spoken, but now he was almost rude. Growling when he stopped talking, Katsuki barked, while she what? Izuku whined as he lost his fight to the command. While she tore one of my horns from my head to create this blasted charm for you. My god demon MSTR. He yelled out the last of his confession. Fists now clenched tight enough to draw BLD Katsuki's head reeled back at the scream that was directed at him. Horn. MSTR. What was this even talking about? What do you mean horn? You don't have horns. And I'm not your god DMN MSTR. He growled, a dark black puff of smoke escaping out through his nostrils. Izuku let out a laughing sob. Yes, you are. My punishment for healing you was for me to be bound to you in servitude. What you say goes. What you command I must follow. I have no choice now. I am yours for you to do with as you please. These bonds, he moved his hands out in front of him, indicating to the iron bands around his wrist and the one around his neck, mean I am owned. I am your SLV. Katsuki grumbled. I'm not stupid, I know what they mean. But that does not mean I will be your MSTR. Wait, what do you mean you must follow what I say? Katsuki was confused now. He had never heard of that before. Yes, he had heard of Fae being bound by magic, the way this one has been. But they never had their choice taken away the way this one was indicating. Izuku blinked in disbelief. You don't know. Katsuki let his eyes fall in a hooded expression. Of course I don't. Groaning, Izuku rubbed the bridge of his nose. Half Fae are different. When we become bound, depending on the severity of the cost, we lose our free will. We will become forced to follow through with what our masters command of us. Whether it's to pluck a flower or take a life, we will follow our MSDR's command. Is our punishment. Izuku jumped at the roar that escaped the dragon. That's bullshit. Why would the Earth Mother do such a thing? She is not a cruel being. You must be wrong. Izuku let his shoulders relax and spoke softly to the dragon. He knew he would have a tough time believing his words. Dragons were one of the first children the Earth Mother birthed. They were extremely loyal to her and followed the teaching of their elders. I'm sorry, dragon, but she is a cruel mother, at least to the halflings. The breeds were not meant to mix, but they did. And our ancestors insulted her in doing this. So, she cursed her halfling children. We could not use her magic without a price. Some have prices that are worse than others, but there is always a cost. He waited for the repercussions of his words. He was expecting to be yelled at or told to give himself some sort of punishment. But what he was not expecting was to have a giant red tail come flying at him, nailing him square in the stomach, and sending him hurling into the outside wall of his dingy hut. The air left his lungs in a whoosh. Pain flared up his spine, and he curled in on himself, his arms clenching his stomach in an attempt to relieve the pain. Great, he just knew that caused some broken ribs. Katsuki hovered above him, blocking out the sun and engulfing the small half-elf in darkness. Snarling, Katsuki spoke. You will not speak of the Earth Mother in such a way. She is great and powerful. She deserves your respect, and you will give it. You will never speak of her that way again. You will apologize. Am I understood? Katsuki let his growl taper off long enough to allow the elf to speak. Sighing, Izuku pulled himself to his knees and bowed to the dragon. His forehead coming to rest against the ground, he swallowed the lump of despair in his chest and did as he was told. I apologize, Earth Mother, for my rude and horrible words. You allowed me to heal one of your great children, and I will take any punishment you deem worthy of me. And I apologize to you, my MSTR, for my uncouth words. I am at your mercy, MSTR. He had wanted to stop his words, but his mouth wouldn't stop. His apology was forced from him. Oh, the embarrassment and utter turmoil he felt right now. Katsuki snorted and turned away from the ridiculous display. Better. Now rest. We leave at dawn to figure out how to break this bond. I don't need a halfling like you bound to me. He walked away from the bowing Fae and laid himself down at the edge of the clearing. Izuku's head snapped up at the dragon's words. Leaving. He had to leave. Swallowing down the urge to cry, Izuku pulled himself to his feet and entered his hut. Closing the door behind him, he let his tears escape. Falling to his knees, he collapsed on the floor, his back hitting the door. He was being forced to leave his home, the only place he could have peace, his only safe place. He buried his face in his hands and let the pain engulf him. He gave himself to Toga for this DMN charm, only to have the dragon he was bound to be a complete monster. Yes, he knew dragons were temperamental, but he had never expected to be attacked the way he was. The dragon didn't care what damage was caused to his body, a body that he could no longer heal himself. The Earth Mother had taken that when he healed the dragon. Sobs racked his body. He was alone with no one to turn to, forced to now bend to this dragon that didn't even hesitate to harm him. All because he had told the truth about the Earth Mother that the dragon had loved so much. He had to bend to everyone's wishes his entire life, forced to listen to the taunts and threats just for being alive, never allowed to defend himself from the physical blows that always came to him. The only peace he could get was being in nature, to have the plants surround him and animals to offer them their comfort. He couldn't help but whine in distress at the memory of his plant life, cringing away from him after his acts with Toga. It wasn't the first time they had done so, but this time he had a horrible feeling it would not revert to its original acts. He had hoped this dragon would show him mercy for the price he had paid, but mercy was not his to have. He would have to bow at this dragon's feet and do as he was told. His breath stuttered as he pulled his face away from his hands and clutched at his stomach. He was sore and his ribs hurt. Groaning, he stood to his feet and reached for his healing kit on his table. There wasn't much he could do but bind his torso. His wounds would now have to heal on their own. Once his chest was thoroughly bound, he turned toward the mirror hanging from his wall and closed his eyes, building up the courage to drop his glamour. He didn't want to see the wound upon his head caused by Toga. He had to provide the materials for the charm he now wore around his neck. The beads made from his BLD and the brown fong-shaped horns crossed in between the beads. He opened his eyes as the glamour fell and had to repress another sob. On the top of his head where there once sat two appealing antlers, now sat one. Izuku sniffled and brought his hand up to his head and gently probed the rough pointed stub of his lost antler. Oh, how it hurt to have the horn snap from his head. He knew it would grow back. It wasn't the first time he had broken an antler, but it still hurt, especially considering it was used in such a barbaric way. He knew the dragon hadn't discovered the antlers yet, but he knew it was only a matter of time, and he was not looking forward to that conversation. He was lucky the dragon had forgotten about asking about the horns and only focused on his insult to his precious Earth Mother. Izuku's lip curled in a near-silent growl. He hated the Earth Mother. She had dismissed him and abandoned him just for being born, punishing him and cursing his magic to kill when he wanted to heal the way all nature elves could. But no, his magic killed the nature he so thrived from, the nature he found sweet peace in. He was forced to kill it when he asked for her help. Anger quickly washed over him, washing away his pain. He hated belonging to the god DMN Earth Mother, hated elves, hated all Fae. All they had done was hate him. Why should he always be happy and brush off their blows and insults when he did nothing wrong but be born? The temperature in his hut dropped, and shadows began to grow and engulf the sun that had leaked in through his broken windows. Izuku closed his eyes and basked in the cold darkness that had begun filling his pitiful hut. Yes, he thrived for nature, but he lived for the dark. It ate away fears and quelled the pain. He smiled and looked back in the mirror and froze. Eyes wide at the face in front of him, he watched as his once pure, bright emerald green eyes had darkened to a dark pine. His elf ears had gained black tips, and his one solitary horn had sprouted another dagger-sharp point. His canines had elongated into fangs poking from his soft lips. He swallowed back the panic and snapped his eyes shut, willing the anger in his bones away. He couldn't give into the dark, no matter how much it helped him. He had to stay with the sun, with the life that did surround him, even though he couldn't touch it. It was still there. Bringing his hands to his face, he dropped his head to his palms and slowed his breathing. Be positive. He could do this. He would be fine. His wounds were bound. His antler was no longer bleeding. It would regrow. Though he was bound to the dragon, he was still alive. He was allowed to live another day. Swallowing his anger, he let a smile grace his lips and glanced back at his reflection. A rush of relief shone on his face at the absence of his darker features. He was safe. He was fine. No one saw. It's fine. Rolling his shoulders, Izuku backed away from the mirror and sat on his bed. He needed to pack. If they were leaving in the morning, then he would not be allowed to return to his hut anytime soon. Reaching to the hook next to his bed, he removed his satchel and began packing. He opened his nightstand drawer and pulled his sketch pads and pencils, a small knife, a bundle of herbs, and the charcoal he used to clean his antlers. He stood and opened the 2 drawers where he kept his clothes and pulled 3 tunics and 3 pairs of pants into the bag. He didn't have much, so he could pack light. He grabbed his bow and arrow set and set it next to the door for easy access. Sitting back on his bed, he thought about the rest of his belongings. All of it was just material possessions. He had nothing from his mother. No sentimental object from friends. He had none. All he needed was what was in his bag. Sighing, Izuku let his body fall back into his bed. Eyes closed, he let himself fall into a deep slumber. This would be his last night in his own bed. After this, who knew where the dragon would drag him? All he knew was that it wouldn't be pleasant. Not at all. Katsuki held his eyes tightly shut in a horrible attempt to block out the wailing of the little halfling hiding in the pitiful hut. The cries were tugging at the guilt he was feeling. He knew he was a dragon with an attitude, but he had never reacted so strongly to a creature so much smaller than him. Yes, he frightened many smaller beings before, though he had never reacted so harshly. Something about that little fae put him on edge. His instincts were right on the surface, telling him the halfling was a threat. But he couldn't wrap his mind around that. How could something so small and powerless be putting him on edge so bad? He growled and rolled onto his side, eyes now open staring at the now silent hut. Why had he reacted so violently to the fae's words about the Earth Mother? He could have killed the little fae. The thought brought an unpleasant feeling to his gut. He had done his share of killing in his past, but never had he wanted to kill such a weak thing before. In that moment, he could have and wouldn't have thought twice about it. Blinking in surprise at his ruminations, Katsuki sat up abruptly. What was wrong with him? He never would have harmed something so much weaker than him before. He let a small flame of irritation come from his mouth as he stood and began pacing. This wasn't who he was. This was part of the reason he had been expelled from his nest. Dragons weren't meant to be solitary creatures. It made them mad, and Katsuki had been away from his nest and any other dragons for one too many centuries. Stopping, his breath froze in his lungs. That was his problem. He had been secluded from any and all contact with dragons for too long. After all, 400 years was a long time. Falling back onto his haunches, he closed his eyes and focused in on his instincts. He could feel that natural pull of the earth and the need to fly that was always present along with the heat of the flames in his chest. But somewhere at the farthest edge of his consciousness, he could sense a dark, angry pull. The madness, it was there, small but present. throat constricting. His eyes popped open, and he glanced out towards the horizon where he knew his nest was. He could always feel the pull of home, but refused to answer. He never wanted to return to that place. But he didn't want the madness more. He knew what he had to do, but just the thought made his spines rise with anger. Growling, Katsuki glanced back at the small cottage. He knew he didn't have a choice. If he didn't want to lose his SHD and kill the poor bound Fae, he would have to return home, and the Fae would have to accompany him. Groaning in indignation, he settled himself back down to rest. He would have to clue the Fae in on what was going on, and then they would make the trip to his nest. After his madness was cleansed from him, then they would begin the hunt to find someone to break the Fae's bonds, so he could be rid of the insuffering annoyance. Izuku stretched his sore muscles as the morning sun shone in on his tear-stained face. Blinking the sleep from his eyes, he sat up, smiling. Today was going to be a good day. The sun was bright, the air was warm, and the dragon at his window. "Wait, dragon!" Eyes bugging, Izuku screeched and threw his blanket over his head. He had forgotten about the dragon, and his concealment was down. Had the dragon seen his antler? Oh no! What was he supposed to do now? A growly voice shook Izuku from his panic. "I need you out here, Fae. We need to talk." The tone in the dragon's voice left room for no discussion. In despair, Izuku peeked out from a corner of his blanket to see the dragon had moved away from the window. Closing his eyes, he stood and approached his mirror, preparing to irk his concealment when the dragon interrupted him again. "Don't worry about the concealment. I've already seen the antler." Izuku froze and bit his lip. Fear flowed through his veins. His mother had always told him to hide his antlers and his thirst for the dark. Now, a being who was devoted to the Earth Mother and was created to protect, now knew something more was wrong with him. "Let's go, Fae. We have a lot to talk about." Lip quivering, Izuku fought the tears and turned towards the door. It was time to face his fate, a fate he had hidden for his entire life. To say Katsuki was confused would be an understatement. He had thought the halfling was just that, a halfling. That's what the Fae had told him. Why would the Fae hide what he was? It made no sense. And how could he use healing magic? Though the reason as to why the earth died when he did made more sense now. It was forced magic. A magic creature, like him, shouldn't be able to use it. He was pulled from his thoughts when said Fae emerged from his hut, head held low and fingers entwining with each other in anxiety. TKS King at the Fae's reaction, Katsuki spoke. "Why did you hide what you are?" He knew he was being blunt, but he didn't have the patience to beat around the bush today. He could feel the pull of the madness getting stronger. Izuku snapped his attention up at the dragon and gulped. "I was always told to hide what I was. That I wasn't meant to be and would be hunted for what I am. Well, more than I already am." Izuku was slightly confused by the dragon's reaction. He wasn't raging or spitting hate at him. He was merely sitting quietly, head cocked to the side, studying him. "What do you mean hunted? Who would dare hunt a creature like you? Hell, most dragons I know wouldn't even come near you." Okay, now Katsuki was even more confused. What the was this Fae talking about? And just what do you mean not meant to be? Your kind are just as old as dragons, if not older. Izuku's eyebrows disappeared into his hairline. What were you talking about? I'm a halfling. You know, a human mother and a Fae father. What was this dragon even talking about? Katsuki stood abruptly and took 2 giant steps to hover above the boy. "You don't know. How is that even possible? It shouldn't even be possible. Your human mother should have known. She would have been warned before your BRTH. Your powers enough should have told you what you are." He could feel the anger rising in him, at himself, and at this blasted man who had no idea what he was. Growling, he turned from the man and swiftly began pacing in an attempt to calm his mind. Glancing back at the man before him, he could see the fear radiating from his body, and seeing that fear immediately calmed his anger. A being such as he should not feel this level of fear and anxiety. Closing his eyes, he blew a puff of black smoke from his nostrils and spoke again. "Okay, I'm going to try this again. Answer yes or no." Understood. He knew he was being disrespectful, but he just couldn't help it. Izuku merely nodded his head yes and wrapped his arms around his middle in an attempt to bring himself comfort. Katsuki hated the reaction he received and hated even more that he had contributed to it. You believe you are half-fae. Yes, you are alone. Yes, your magic rebels against you when you use it. Correct. Regrettably, yes. Where is your mother? Izuku tensed at the question. The answer was painful, but he needed to answer. She died when I was 12. It's been 5 years since. He didn't understand why the dragon was asking these questions. What did they have to do with what he was? Sighing, Katsuki asked his next question, and your father? Closing his eyes, Izuku answered, never met him. All Mother told me was that he was human. She refused to speak of him. Approaching the young man again, Katsuki lowered himself to be level with the downcast gaze of the young man in front of him. She never spoke of him because he was not human. You will never know your father. None of your kind ever knows at least one of their parents. You, Izuku Midoriya, are half-fae, but also half-god. Your BRTH father was a god. Izuku's gaze snapped to the dragons. What? What are you talking about? Panic immediately set in. Half-god. What was this dragon talking about? He was half-elf, half-human. It's what his mother told him. What everyone told him. You don't know what you're talking about. My mother would have never lied to me like that. I know what I am. Katsuki growled. You do not know because your mother died before she could tell you. I imagine she lied to keep you hidden from those who would seek your power. Your antlers alone signify what you are and your heritage. Izuku couldn't believe what he was being told. How would this dragon even know? How would you know? You don't know me. He yelled out. Deciding to ignore the tone of the half-god, Katsuki answered. Little half-god, I am over 600 years old. I have ran into many beings and lived long enough to learn of these things. I know what I speak. You are a half-god born from the WMB of an elf and the god Erebus, god of darkness. He does not have many offspring, but the few he has given life to are known to carry antlers atop their heads. Just as you do. Katsuki watched as the young half-god soaked up his words. He knew this was going to be a lot, but it needed to be said if they were to travel together. Izuku locked gazes with the dragon. He searched his gaze for any sign of deceit, but found none. Is it possible the dragon was telling the truth? Was his father really a god? The god of darkness? Eyes wide, Izuku brought his hands to his mouth. Was this why he felt even more at home in the dark? Why shadows covered everything when the world became too much? And why magic? What does that mean for my magic? He didn't want the answer, but he needed it. Taking a deep breath, Katsuki answered, I can almost guarantee the reason your magic takes the life of plants when you heal is because you were not meant to have that power. It is a contradiction to your bloodline. Erebus is the god of darkness. He rules the underworld alongside all the other gods who rule there as well. He embodies the unseen and mysterious of the world. He teeters between light and dark. The Earth Mother would not want a child of his to have healing abilities. But that does not mean you cannot still use it. Just not the way you have. Katsuki didn't have any more to say. He knew the half-god needed a moment, and he was more than happy to oblige. Izuku could be more freaked than he really was, honestly. But what the dragon had told him was starting to make sense. His mother would have eventually told him. He knew that. And the fact that he felt safer in the dark than nature spoke volumes. He had so many questions, but didn't know where to start. Looking at the dragon, Izuku asked his next question. How do the gods choose whom to have children with? That is a question I myself cannot answer. Not many can, but I know someone who can, and that brings us to the next part of this conversation. He waited for the half-god to speak, and when he didn't, Katsuki continued. I must return to my nest before we can find someone to remove your bond. My actions last night have brought to light some issues I'm having. How much do you know of dragons? He really didn't want to have this conversation, but it honestly needed to be done. Izuku tilted his head and answered, I really don't know much, only that you are some of the oldest creatures on this earth and one of the first children the Earth Mother created. Katsuki groaned in frustration. God, this kid knew nothing. Yes, that is all true, but there is obviously more to us than that. Dragons are meant to live in nests with many of our kind around. We are not solitary creatures. Being alone too long causes us to fall into madness. He didn't continue his sentence and decided to see if the half-god could figure it out himself. Izuku blinked stupidly at the dragon. That didn't make sense. This dragon was alone. Shouldn't he? Oh no. Are you saying you're... He didn't want to say. Quirking an eyebrow, Katsuki answered, going mad. Yeah, I am. That's why I reacted the way I did last night. Though that is no excuse. He wasn't going to apologize. He didn't do that. Izuku shrugged his shoulders. It's okay. That wasn't the worst I've had done to me. I mean, look at my head. Toga took an antler. He was interrupted from his ramblings by a vicious growl. That is why you're missing your antler. Why did she take it? What right did she have? Why was he acting so nonchalant about this? You do not take an antler from one of the god's children. If Katsuki would have known, he would have... Katsuki stopped his growl when the half-god interrupted him. You forget this is my life. That was not the first antler I have given for charms for someone else. It benefited me in the end. It will regrow. Yes, it was painful, but I will survive. I always have. There is no need to get so angry. Izuku knew the dragon was quick to anger, and now he knew why. His madness was there. Now that he knew what he was seeing, he could see it. The darker red eyes and the quivering of his back spines. Katsuki stared at him. What was your antler used for? Izuku smiled and gestured to the necklace around his neck. The beads are made from my BLD, and the fangs are formed from my antler. Closing his eyes and letting his wings fall to the ground, Katsuki spoke. I have never been upset with our Earth Mother before, but I am finding my anger directed at her. For her to bind you to me in such a way and leave me with no means to speak to you. I am unsure of what to make of this. Katsuki didn't like his train of thought. It felt as though he was betraying everything he had ever been taught. Yes, some of what he had learned from his mother and the elders never sat well with him, but the Earth Mother teachings, that he had always held on it tightly. Katsuki flinched slightly when a hand sat itself gently on his snout. He opened his eyes to the kind smile of the little half-god in front of him. Do not be angry. You love your Earth Mother. I understand her decision better now. We can fix this. It will just take some time. Izuku smiled and removed his hand, bringing it behind his back. He gripped it in the other. Now, it sounds as if we should get going. Katsuki was unsure how to react. No one had ever touched him without permission before. It was a strange feeling, a feeling he wished he could feel again. Izuku collected his belongings from his tiny hut and approached the dragon. So, I have a question. You know my name, but I don't know yours. It feels wrong to keep referring to you as dragon. Katsuki tilted his head at the half-god and grunted, Katsuki. You may call me Katsuki. He knew giving his first name was rare for dragons to do. But after the way he had treated the green-haired man, he felt it was justified. Matter of fact, maybe he should start referring to the half-god by his name as well. What was it you said your name was again? Izuku blinked and answered, Izuku Midoriya. Katsuki grunted, All right, Izuku, let's get going. We've got a hell of a lot of ground to cover, and flying isn't an option right now. Katsuki turned and began the long walk towards the mountains in the distance. Izuku jogged to catch up to the dragon and spoke, I'm sorry I was unable to restore your wings to their previous condition. I didn't have enough magic stored up for such a large healing. Izuku knew it wasn't his fault, but he still felt guilty. Katsuki stopped and turned his golden head towards Izuku. The fault is not with you. You did not know you were using your magic in the wrong way. You have to learn how to use it all over again. Turning his head away from Izuku, Katsuki began moving again. Izuku looked down at the grass beneath his feet. He had to relearn how to use magic. That made sense, but he had no clue where to start. He had always just used his magic. He had never been taught. Katsuki, I don't know how to relearn magic. I never had anyone show me how. Katsuki came to an abrupt halt and swung his entire body around to gaze at the half-god. What do you mean no one ever taught you? You can't just use your magic without instruction. No one can. His statement came out more as a growl than he intended. Without proper instruction, you could kill yourself. Izuku folded into himself at the growl. I've been alone for a while, now Katsuki. When my mother was still alive, I hadn't developed my powers yet. And when she died, I had no one to show me. So I just winged it. Katsuki sighed at the reaction he received from Izuku. He needed to remember this man was young and beaten down. His growling seemed to just cause the half-god to crumble into himself. Listen, Izuku, until we can find you a teacher, I'm going to ask you to not use your magic. The fault does not lie with you. This is not a normal occurrence. Half-god children normally grow up in a community of other magical fae that can guide them. I don't know why your mother was alone, but it definitely is not normal. Nature elves live in large communities. The fact your mother was alone is a mystery. The sooner we get to my nest, the sooner we can get help from you. So, remember until then, do not use your magic. Katsuki let his sentence end and turned to walk away, but froze when Izuku answered. Yes, Master. Izuku didn't mean it. He couldn't stop the compulsion to obey. The words just came out of his mouth unbidden. He closed his eyes, shame coursing through him. Katsuki had commanded him not to use his magic, and any command he was bound to follow. Ice filled Katsuki's veins at those two words. His eyes widened when he realized what he had done. Turning back towards Izuku, Katsuki let his horror show. I didn't mean that. I didn't mean to give you a command. This is up. Katsuki's tail hit the ground in agitation, causing the little half-god to flinch. Away. Watching him flinch just made Katsuki's chest tighten. He had no one to blame for the young man's reaction, considering how he had struck him just the night before. Closing his eyes, Katsuki did something he had never done. Turning back towards Izuku, Katsuki lowered his body to the ground and laid his head down to rest on the grass below him. Opening his eyes, he focused on the feet before him. He let out a pleading whine and allowed his wings to unfurl and drape pathetically beside his body. Izuku stood stone still as Katsuki lowered his body and ducked his head at Izuku's feet. He brought his hand to his mouth and covered it in shock and horror. Was Katsuki submitting to him? Him? Worthless Izuku. No. No. Please, Katsuki, get up. Izuku's pleading was interrupted by pathetic-sounding words. I do not wish to be your MSTR. I do not want you to cower from me. I do not want to cause you harm. I am sorry I struck you last night. My anger got the best of me. I do not want to command you. I rescind any command I have given you. Katsuki felt utterly repulsed by his actions, but they were needed. He had wronged this man who saved his life and paid for it with his freedom. He flinched slightly when small, warm hands gripped his muzzle and pulled his face from the ground. Izuku let his hands gently caress the golden muzzle of the dragon at his feet. Tears gathered in his eyes as he spoke. Do not bring yourself lower than you deserve to stand, Katsuki. You are a dragon. I accept your apology for what it's worth. I believe you when you say you don't wish me harm. And though you commanded me, I know it was not meant. I hold no ill will towards you. Let's just forget about what happened and move forward. Okay. Katsuki held still in Izuku's hands. No one had willingly touched him this way before. He had never let anyone close enough in order to even try. But for some reason, he couldn't deny this touch. It felt nice, warm, comforting even. Closing his eyes, he nuzzled into the warmth. He knew he would later hate himself for giving into the temptation of the caress, but right now, he didn't want to deny himself the feeling. Izuku hadn't expected Katsuki to nuzzle into his hand. He expected the dragon to deny his touch in revulsion. Everyone else did. A lump formed in his throat, and he lowered his head, eyes closed, and rested his head against the forehead of the golden dragon in his hands. He let the tears fall, and he spoke, his voice breaking. No. No one has wanted my touch this way before. Every touch I have ever received has been harsh and meant to cause pain other than my mother's. Izuku let the tears fall. Tears he had repressed for far too long. Tears of pain, loss, sorrow, loneliness. Thanks, Katsuki. Thank you. Katsuki felt the wetness of Izuku's tears land on his muzzle. Katsuki knew the two of them were forming a fast bond. A bond that should take years to form. Dragons didn't allow others to touch their scales unless the person was special. But he couldn't bring himself to pull away from Izuku's hold. It made him feel warm and wanted. Needed. Katsuki had been alone for so long, he had forgotten what it felt like to feel this way. Yes, the two of them were brought together in a horrible way, but this connection they were forming felt right. New, incomplete, but right. Katsuki slowly pulled his head from Izuku's hold and rumbled low in his throat. Okay, enough of this mushy CRP. We need to get moving. Katsuki turned back around and watched as Izuku lifted his pack and started walking. What do you think you're doing? Izuku blinked and tilted his head in confusion. Walking. Katsuki grunted. I'm going to give you your first lesson in real healing so we can get moving along faster. I do not have the patience to walk as far as I had originally thought. Izuku scrunched his eyebrows. I thought you couldn't teach me anything. I never said I couldn't teach you, only that you need a teacher. I can show you some things, but not much. This is probably the most useful thing I could teach you. Now, shut up and listen. Katsuki growled out. Izuku lowered his bag to the ground and clasped his hands together in front of him. Okay, I guess. Sighing, Katsuki began to speak. Okay, first thing you need to know is connecting to the earth to use magic is just going to cause a backlash to you. You're not meant to connect to the Earth Mother. You're meant to connect to the darkness. There's one way you can heal, and trust me, it won't be hard for you to do it. You've already been doing it. Wait, what? To say Izuku was confused was an understatement. How was he already using this magic when he didn't even know he could? Katsuki chuckled and sat back on his haunches. The way you healed me is the way to do it. But in order to not have the backlash from the Earth Mother, you need to concentrate on the darkness. It's called life magic redirection. You pull the life force from other living things, whether it be plants, animals, or your own life force. I wouldn't recommend the last one, though. Not yet, at least. Izuku blanched at Katsuki's words, but I don't want to kill something in order to heal. I already do that, and it's horrible. Isn't there another way? Izuku begged Katsuki, his face showing his anguish. Katsuki let out a whine and bumped his head against Izuku's gently. Nuzzling into the boy's curls, he spoke. If done correctly, you will not kill the living being you choose to pull power from. Only exhaust it. Izuku, you are the son of a primordial god, one who does not bear offspring often. When he does, the children he bears are great and powerful. It is not a power to fear or hate. Yes, your bloodline comes from one of the rulers of the underworld where the dead rest. Yes, he dwells in darkness and thrives in chaos. But that does not mean you have to. The darkness you come from can be manipulated how its user wishes. Darkness isn't inherently evil, it's an in-between state. Quite literally. Without darkness, the sun will constantly be out and would bake this earth, killing all plant life, drying up the ocean, streams, and lakes. The earth needs darkness to reset itself daily. So, you merely have to learn how the darkness works for you. It will not taint you. I swear. Katsuki pulled his head away from Izuku and bumped his nose under Izuku's chin. You can do this. Focus on the life source you want to use and send it into the thing you wish to heal. In this instance, send it to my wings. Izuku looked up at Katsuki, eyes wide. You want me to use another life force to heal you. But aren't dragons against that kind of thing? Aren't you all protectors of the Earth Mother's creations? He asked, disbelief filling his voice. Katsuki scoffed. We are, but you'll come to learn I am far different from other dragons, Izuku. Now, close your eyes and concentrate. Swallowing, Izuku nodded his head and closed his eyes. Good, now find your life force you want to use. It must be able to have enough life force to match what you wish to heal. Once you find it, focus on the shadows you can feel around you and pull them into yourself, then push them out towards what you want to heal. Take your time. Katsuki sat quietly and watched Izuku, his face scrunched in concentration. Being a dragon, he could feel when Izuku started to pull on the shadows around them. The trees stilled and the area they stood in darkened. Shadows began swirling around them in a silent dance. Katsuki was honestly in awe, the way the wind picked up and gently tossed the locks of green. Hair around Izuku's face made the half-god look more ethereal. He squinted when the tips of Izuku's ears darkened and fangs sprouted from his small mouth. The lone antler upon his head seemed to sharpen and elongate, making him look like he had come from the darkness he belonged in. When Izuku opened his eyes, Katsuki held his breath when dark pine-colored eyes connected with his fierce red. He was appealing. That thought stilled Katsuki. He knew Izuku was nothing to be ashamed of, but the thought still frightened him. Dragons were the embodiment of life. He shouldn't feel this kind of connection to one such as he. But he did, and it sent a chill of fear through his scales. Izuku took a step forward, and Katsuki had to will himself not to tense at the dark creature reaching out for him. Izuku stepped up to Katsuki's side and reached forward, gently laying his hand on Katsuki's wing. The coldness that came from the once warm hands sent a jolt through Katsuki. Izuku tensed and pulled away. Cursing his reaction, Katsuki quickly spoke. "No, it's fine, Izuku. Your hand is just cold. You didn't hurt me." Izuku let out a shuddering breath and replaced his hand against Katsuki's wing. The feeling that was running through him was astonishing. He had never felt this kind of pure power before. It was exhilarating and made a feeling of rightness fill him. He understood now. This is how he was meant to use his powers. He was never meant to connect to the Earth Mother. Hi's home was in the dark where his father dwelt, and that home called him, beckoned him with open arms. It was safe and welcoming. Smiling, Izuku placed his other hand against Katsuki's wing and pushed. Katsuki's eyes widened when the coldness of Izuku's hands slowly warmed to a comforting level that made his muscles relax. A pulsing began to emanate from the hands on his wings that seemed to match the heartbeat of the half-god next to him. It was wonderful to witness. He immediately felt repulsed at his fear he had of Izuku moments ago. This young man, next to him, was nothing to fear. His quickly growing affections weren't wrong either. He knew that now. Relaxing further into the touch, he closed his eyes and allowed his body to sink to the forest floor. When Izuku felt Katsuki begin to lower to the ground, he flashed his eyes towards the dragon's face and was awestruck at the content look. Katsuki was enjoying this. Did it feel that good? Hi's question was answered when the dragon under his hands began to release a chuffing purr of contentment. Izuku smiled at Katsuki's reaction. He began to move his hands against the wing in his grasp, slowly spreading the warmth from his fingers into every dip and curve of the soft appendage. Hi's smile grew even more when a sharp-toothed smile was shown on Katsuki's face. It was actually pretty funny. Funny enough, Izuku let out a giggle. Katsuki's eyes snapped open at the small, stifled giggle that came from his companion's mouth. He glanced at him from the corner of his eye and rolled it at the smile he was being given. "Shut up, it feels good." Izuku laughed and turned his attention back to his task, only to pause when he noticed the rough scars on the wing he held were now smooth, but white standing out against the black color. Izuku dropped his hands and stepped back. "I think that'll do it." He looked down at the ground, a resignation feeling him. Katsuki looked back at his wings and extended them, enjoying the feeling of being able to have full flexibility of them again. He turned his excited face towards Izuku, only to frown at the look of defeat. "Izuku, what's wrong? You did it, my wings are healed." Izuku looked up at the dragon with tears running down his cheeks. "I couldn't fix the scars. I'm sorry." Katsuki tilted his head and looked back at his wings. He stood and flapped them a couple times, causing the leaves and dirt to drift up around him and Izuku. Looking back at Izuku, Katsuki bent his legs and propelled himself into the air. Hi's wings extended and flapped quickly. He rose higher and higher. The wind ran over his scales, and the sun warmed his BLD, leveling himself out. He hovered above where Izuku was. He could see the half-god now sobbing into his hands. Katsuki's chest constricted at the sight, and he let himself gently fall back down to the earth. Once his feet touched the ground, Katsuki approached the sobbing mess and thumped his head on top of Izuku's. "I don't know why you're crying that way, idiot. I can fly again. I don't care about some scars. They mean nothing to me. You succeeded at what you set out to do." Izuku looked up at the dragon standing before him and sniffled. It's okay, you have scars. Aren't dragons supposed to be appealing and majestic?" Katsuki scoffed a puff of gray smoke in Izuku's face, causing him to cough and wave his hand around. "Are you saying with my scars I'm no longer appealing and majestic as you claim I should be? Do they make me ugly now?" Katsuki didn't really care what he looked like, he just wanted the little half-god to stop feeling bad about something pointless. Izuku paled and quickly answered Katsuki, No, you're still appealing. I mean, you're freaking amazing, Katchan. Katsuki raised a scaled eyebrow. Katchan, is that who I am now? Katsuki let out a chuffing laugh. If I get a nickname, I guess I'll have to come up with one for you. But now that we got that meltdown taken care of, how about we get a move on? Huh? Izuku stopped flailing his hand around to cup them over his mouth at the slip-up. You don't mind. Katsuki chuffed and extended a leg to the little man. Not one bit, little halfling. Now climb on. Izuku looked from Katsuki's leg to his face and back again. You want me to ride you? But that's so insulting. Izuku yelled out in horror. I couldn't do that, Katchan. Katsuki rolled his eyes and pulled his leg back. I choose who rides on my back. If I decide it is not insulting, then it isn't. If I want a rider, I will have a rider. Now, Izuku Midoriya, do you want to be my rider? Katsuki puffed up his chest with determination and stubbornness. The reaction he got from Izuku couldn't have made Katsuki any more happier. His dark green eyes lit up and a smile broadened across his face. Yes, Katchan, I'll be your rider. At the acceptance of his offer, Katsuki re-extended his leg and chuckled as Izuku scrambled up and seated himself at the base of his neck, right in front of his wings. Now hold on to the spines at the base of my neck, Izuku, and hold tight. At his final word, Katsuki launched himself into the air. He laughed when Izuku let out an excited squeal. Katsuki had never thought this day would come. The day when a dragon who had hated being around anyone, who preferred to be alone, who just a mere day ago was on the brink of death, would willingly allow himself to be claimed by a rider. Thank you for joining us on this journey through What If Elf Deku Posses' healing force magic. We hope you found it as captivating as we did. A big thank you to Kateri0718 for creating such an engaging story. Don't forget to visit their profile on Archive of Our Own, or for more fantastic works. The link is in the description below. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and subscribe to Zen and Fanfics for more intriguing explorations into fanfiction and fantasy. Your support helps us create more content like this, and we love hearing your thoughts and suggestions in the comment section. See you soon in the next video.